Have you ever looked at your pastors and leaders and thought, what do you do all week? Like, y'all just work like 2 hours every Sunday and then go home. Well, we're going to answer the question on that. We're also going to answer the question of, do you have to get married to have a husband or a wife? I guess we'll find out. You also may be wondering, who is this guy sitting next to me? We're going to answer all these questions and more today on Digging Deeper podcast. Hey, and welcome to the Digging Deeper podcast. Our goal in this podcast is to dig a little bit deeper into that week's sermon, so that way we might dig a little bit deeper into our hearts. Today is a very special day because, well, let me first introduce myself before we introduce y'all. If y'all don't know, my name's Chris Brown. I'm the associate pastor here. We're going to skip you for a second. Let's go to you first. You got to show them the video.
How do you do it?
Number 2. There you go.
Hey, I'm Michael.
What do you do, Michael?
I'm the student pastor here and the guy that reluctantly does the sound on the podcast.
Yeah. People want to know who you are. Yeah. Okay.
I was actually really excited to see Judah today.
I know. Judah's out of town, so Judah's not here, unfortunately. But we've got special guest today.
I'm Andrew Malone, Associate Pastor of Discipleship at Northview Baptist Church in Louisville, Texas.
Yeah, so we've got an external guest today.
I'm glad you didn't say expert guest, because external guest is probably more accurate.
We've got an expert guest on his opinion. And so Andrew, me and Andrew have known each other since I was in 8th grade. You were in...
I think so. I was 6th grade going into 7th grade, yeah.
Yep. We've known each other all through junior high and high school, grew up in the same church, went to the same college, and now we're both in ministry. Like you said, he does.
At his wedding, I said that my goal in life was to be Chris Brown.
That's true. Yeah. Andrew was the best man at my wedding, and so he got to share. Michael was there too. You were at the wedding.
Yeah, I left her mom up there.
You walked my mom down the aisle and then just abandoned her. Anyways, so Jacob is out of town also on a conference, and so
I did actually think about Jacob this morning because I was going to trim my beard, and then I thought Jacob's beard is so elegant that I've got to leave mine long. Yeah,
you can never be as good as Jacob and his beard.
Yeah, absolutely.
But none of us can. So anyways, so brought Andrew on because he also works in ministry. Associate pastor of discipleship and education. Is that what we said?
Yeah, everything.
Yeah.
I started at Northview as a music associate, actually, 9 years ago, and that turned into our student pastor left to plant a church, and so then I moved into student ministry, and then our accountant left, and so I added, bookkeeping to my job duties, and then as of January, I am over all of our discipleship, but then I also have the privilege of also doing our student ministry still.
Mm-hmm. So you basically do whatever they tell you to do.
That's exactly line 13 of my job description is all other duties assigned by the senior pastor.
Yeah, you gotta have that in there just for liability reasons.
Sure. Yeah.
So we asked Andrew come on, which is actually really fitting for today because I preached this past Sunday, and it was all about what are the responsibilities of pastors and leaders in the church, and how can the church honor, appreciate, and partner with pastors in those abilities. It's actually good to have you on, not only because you work in ministry, but your dad.
I was going to reveal that fact. Yeah. So I've seen ministry. To me, the pastor is an interesting position. I grew up with a lot of guys. My dad was a pastor, and so he was when I was born, he was a pastor at First Baptist Church, Melissa. And then when I was in 2nd grade, we moved to Bonham, and he was the pastor at First Baptist Church Bonham for 13 years there. So 9 years in Melissa, 13 years in Bonham. And I grew up with a lot of kids whose dads were pastors. And the whole pastor's kid stereotype to me actually does hold up for a lot of people. But the blessing for me is that I saw the pastorate lived out in a way where my dad loved the church and he loved shepherding the flock, but he also loved his family, and he took a lot of time to spend with us. And so I've been able to see see a good example of what it is to be a pastor, but then also to experience it as a dad now and a husband, to live as a pastor and then also as a dad. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so your dad was a pastor for a long time. He's now the
he's the executive director of the Denton Baptist Association.
Big wig.
Yes, sir. Yeah, he's a pastor's pastor.
Yeah, and so he literally meets with pastors all the time. That's just his job.
Yeah, it's actually incredibly awkward when I meet with him.
Because you're meeting with him as the executive director?
Yeah. So I had a meeting with him last week, and he...
You call him Morgan?
Well, I still talk to him as dad, right? But he does this, he slips into this coaching mode where instead of just giving you advice, he starts asking you questions and trying to probe you as per his job. But it's also like, okay, I need you to stop and I need you to tell me what to do because
I need you to be my dad right now, not the executive director. Yep. So your dad does that. Your sister and brother-in-law also in ministry.
Yeah, my brother-in-law is a youth pastor. I guess that's his title. I'm not sure what it is. At First Baptist Church of Louisville. My sister, actually, this is going to ruffle some SBC feathers. My sister started a job this year as the campus pastor for a Christian school. That's her title. And so
I didn't know she was doing that.
Yeah, they've decided that's what her title is going to be. So she does, she leads chapel and then teaches Bible study classes at Liberty Christian in Argyle. So where Jason Witten is the football coach.
Yeah, how's that going?
I don't.
Jason Witten's a football coach now?
Yeah.
For a small private school?
It's not a small
private school. It's not small? Is it big?
Yeah, it's pretty big.
Oh.
Yeah. That it's look them up. Look up Liberty Christian.
How cool would that be to say, hey, my coach is Jason Witten?
He's coming to my birthday, so.
Is he really?
Is he?
No, I asked my sister to make me to put me in contact with him. That hasn't happened yet, but I'm waiting maybe until fall festival or something like that.
Yeah, I sent him a message. I'm just waiting for him to get back. Yeah. He's busy.
Hey, coach. Yeah.
Anyways, so Andrew has a very extensive, not only experience in ministry, but being around people in ministry. And so it's fitting for today's topic.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so let's get into the sermon because that's the whole point as to why we're here. So again, I preached. The sermon was called, and the whole premise of the sermon is God has called pastors and leaders to lead his church. And what does that look like? Like not what do we think it looks like, but biblically speaking, what has God specifically called pastors and leaders to do in the church? And then also this month is Pastor Appreciation Month. And so the question is, because it's Pastor Appreciation Month, how can we now honor and appreciate our pastors and leaders and partner with them in these biblical roles that they're called to do? So that's the whole premise of the sermon. The 3 points from it are pastors and leaders are called to shepherd the flock, they're called to watch over the flock, and they're called to equip the flock.
Yeah. So
I started out, you probably heard in listening to it, talking about bad bosses. Have you ever had a bad boss?
I've had several. Well, that's rude. I've had a bunch of different jobs. I really liked your movie theater job. What movie theater were you at? In Longview or in Bonham?
No, it was Majestic 6.
Majestic 6 Theater in Bonham was the hopping place to be.
Yeah.
That was the job to have if you were a Bonham high school student, and I never had that opportunity. But I've had some bad bosses. I've had some bad pastor bosses. I've had a bad pastor bosses. Pastor boss. I worked at a church when I was in college. I actually also thought about the church that you worked at where the pastor, he went by the Falcon.
No, it wasn't the Falcon. It was the Eagle.
Oh, the Eagle.
I thought about
call me the Eagle.
I thought about sharing that. So I was working at a church as the sound guy, and the guy that led the music referred to himself as the Eagle. Yeah. He used to do radio DJ, and that was his DJ name.
KLAK 105.3.
The Eagle. And so he referred to himself as the Eagle. Yeah, that guy was not a great boss.
Anyways, back to mine. When I was in college, I worked at a church, and I was literally the song leader. Like you hear the old term, song leader or whatever for a small East Texas church, whatever. I was literally the song. I would show up. I would say, everybody turn to hymn 231, and we're going to sing whatever that is. And so when I got there, they didn't have a pastor. They had, I guess, a long-term interim. That period of time is kind of unclear, but I do remember very distinctly them hiring a pastor, and as soon as he came on, the search committee quit and left the church. So that, number one, should have been the first sign. Okay, this isn't a good deal, because the search committee that hired this guy left, and they went to another church.
They're the ones that hired him.
Yes. And so this guy comes in, and his dad had been a pastor. I guess if he sees this, it's going to be really incriminating. But his dad had been a pastor, and so to me, this may not have been true, but it seemed like to me he had a file cabinet of his dad's sermons, and he would just pick them out and pin them in his Bible, and then just sit up there and read. And so this guy had been a pastor at several different churches. Well, he came to our church, and I was a young guy, and he was new, and so he said, "Hey, I'd like to take you to a lunch, and we can talk about how to improve the church and blah, blah, blah." And I was like, "Oh, really excited. That sounds great. Let's do that." And so, the Sunday came that we were going to go to lunch, and, we locked up the church. And as soon as we shut the door to his car, he starts immediately vaping. "Hey, do you mind if I do this? It's just vapor. It's not a big deal." So I was like, okay, that's weird.
That was like early on.
Oh, yeah.
In the vaping scene.
Oh, yeah. It was 2012 or something. Like, vapes were brand new. Yeah. So immediately starts vaping, and I was like, okay, that's weird, but okay.
How old was this guy?
Maybe in his 40s. Yeah. I don't know. He seemed ancient at the time, but I was also like 22. Yeah. So he starts doing that, and then as we pull out of the parking lot, he just immediately starts slamming church members and cussing up a storm. This guy, this blanking guy, blah, 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 blah. And so we had this whole meeting, and for an hour and a half, I just sat there in uncomfortable silence as this guy just berated people.
Which, by the way, just to clarify again, you were on staff.
I was on staff. Yeah.
Like it wasn't like he was talking to like a friend outside the church. Like you were like
we were not friends. He was. I had known him 2 weeks, which is another bold thing that you're just gonna immediately confide in this 22-year-old kid about nothing. And so, he just starts blasting all of these church members and this and this and this, and we can't do this because of this and this and this, and we got to get these people out and blah, blah, blah. And so we got back to the church, and I just, thanks for the lunch, and got in my car and drove home in silence. No clue what to do. And so the very next Sunday, I said, "Hey, man, this is going to be my last Sunday." And he was like, "Oh, man, was it something I said?" I was like, "Absolutely it was." That's exactly why I'm quitting. Bad boss. Yeah. Bad boss.
And then I think you said that church ended up shutting down.
They shut down. And then I saw him actually, ironically, I saw him like 6 months later. And I was eating lunch, and he came up, and I was like, "Oh, no." And so he came up, and he was like, "Hey, would you believe that they're blaming this whole church shutdown thing on me?" I said, "Absolutely, I would believe that. Yes." I can't, man, I'm so sorry to hear that. I can't believe it. At that time, I was working at another church, and I was working with Tom Webster. And
Tom.
So it was a good deal.
Tom was a great boss.
Tom was a great boss because he was the dean of our music school, and at school we were required to call him Dr. Webster, and at work at church we were required to call him Tom, and so it was the most
he was
convoluted.
He's probably one of the quirkiest guys I've ever met, but you could tell, man, he really did care.
He loved choir. He loved the music ministry. He loved ministering to people with music, and so he was a great boss and a great lead in that regard. Yeah.
Michael, you ever had bad bosses?
Well, after working here with Pastor Lee, everybody seems like a bad boss now.
Yeah, in comparison.
I work for the greatest boss ever.
It's like when Jesus said, like, "You love me so much that like you hate everyone else," like in comparison.
Exactly.
So like he's such a good boss that everyone else is just bad in comparison.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've never even worked for Lee, and I think he's a good boss.
Yeah, there you go.
He's a great boss.
Yeah.
So, yeah. No, for real though, I mean, none stick out like
you were
stories.
A boss for a while. Were you a bad boss?
So a lot of people had a bad boss for years
because of you.
No, I like to think I cared about people and I was a good boss, but I don't know.
Yeah,
maybe that's another podcast and bring on past experience of Michael as a boss.
Yeah, we go track down all of your former
bad boss,
employees,
or King of Sonic.
Yeah.
Could be the title.
Yeah.
No.
And it's one of those things where we don't even mention you. Like you're like behind a like black sheet over here.
Got to do the voiceover thing.
Yeah, no, they don't even know he's here.
Oh, okay.
And then like we just get them to say a bunch of bad stuff, and then we say, "He's here."
Under covers, boss. Like you put him under covers.
All right, this is going downhill quick. All right. Anyways, bad bosses, good bosses, they really do affect things, as you just shared.
Yeah.
Like a bad boss can sink a church.
Yeah, I listened to a guy speak this last week. I went to youth ministry conference, and this guy named Doug Fields, who's a big youth ministry guy, was talking about
Purpose-driven youth ministry.
Yeah, absolutely. He was at Saddleback when all that was going down. So Doug Fields said he retired like in 2019 or something. And during that time, he was trying to identify what it was to be a good leader and stuff like that. And the research that he uncovered is that if you're working under a bad boss, it actually atrophies you as an employee. It causes you to lose your creativity. It causes you to lose your drive and passion for your work. And so being a good leader is a huge deal in equipping others. That was the thing that I really appreciated about your good boss, is that your Best Buy boss worked his best to make you succeed. It really didn't matter, what was going on with his life or whatever. He wanted you to succeed, and as a result, it made you want to work there. And so that was what Doug was saying, is a good boss raises up, a high tide raises all ships. And so he's trying to draw others up with him without trying to get the credit for himself.
Yeah. So that's kind of the whole foundation, this whole sermon, is that in the same way that in the secular world, the business world, bad bosses or good bosses can sink or float the ships. Same is true in the churches, which begs the question: what is the point of pastors and leaders? Because you can have great guys step into the pastor role, but if they're doing the job wrong, they can still effectively be a bad pastor or a bad leader, not because they're bad people, but because they don't fully understand what their actual responsibility is. And so, we dig into Scripture. Okay, what does the Bible say the role of pastors and leaders are?
Before you got into that, I actually thought, when I heard your intro, I thought you were going a different direction with this sermon. And then I liked where you ended up, but my mind was drawn to like even the evolution of the pastorate. So like the Bible that we have tells the story of a brand new church, right? And so the priest role was a family ordained role. You couldn't be a priest in the Jewish sect, at least in the in the Old Testament, because you had to have been of the tribe of Levi if you wanted to be a priest. And so anybody else outside of that tribe, that was a select tribe in a select group of people that could be a priest to God. Whereas in the New Testament, Paul actually writes in 1 Timothy chapter 3, he says, if anyone aspires to the role of overseer, that's an honorable thing. And then he goes on to give a bunch of lists of what that looks like. And then you touched on in 1 Timothy 5 that it's a burden and it's something that shouldn't be taken lightly. But to me, that idea of even the calling of a pastor is something that God has placed a desire in somebody's heart to do this. It's not an easy thing. It's not something that's to be taken lightly. But the people that step into that role, Paul says in 1 Timothy 3 that's an honorable thing, that they would have a desire to do that. I thought it was interesting.
Charles Spurgeon says, when asking the question of like, should someone not go into a ministry role, and he says, if you cannot do it, don't do it.
Yeah.
It's like,
if you can do anything else, don't do it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very much, he kind of places like the call of the ministry as like really high, that if you're called to it, then literally it's the only thing that you're drawn to. But if you can do something else, go do something else. Yeah. Like you're gonna be better fit doing something else. And that's true in my life. It's one of those things. Ever since I was in 8th grade, I felt the call in the ministry. I don't know why. I remember going to Kevin, our youth pastor, and just saying, hey, I feel God's calling me to ministry. I was a punk kid. I'm sure he probably was like...
He was the kid in your youth group that like would eat the goldfish. Like if we were playing games, he would be the one that would come up and eat the goldfish.
Yeah. So I was this like punk kid, and I'm pretty sure, like hindsight, I go up to him and say, "Hey, I feel like God's calling me into ministry." I'm pretty sure he had the thought of, okay,
he just wants to play games all day.
Sure,
whatever, yeah.
Sure. And ever since then, just felt that call. Like, nothing else. Like, there's other things that like I've dabbled in. But there's always been that call to ministry, and even being in ministry, if there's ever the thought of like what else would I do if I didn't do this? And it's like, it's almost like with the disciples and Jesus, when Jesus is like, "Are y'all going to go too?" And they're like, "Where else are we going to go?"
Yeah.
And that's kind of the thought that I have of like, the thought of doing anything else in ministry. It's like, what else am I going to do? Like this is what God has called me to. Anyways. So you're right. Yeah. Now it's like spread way open. And before we even get into the things, so in 1 Timothy 3, when it talks about, the qualifications of leaders, it's funny. I think for the longest time, churches have hired pastors and leaders wrongly. So they've hired pastors and leaders based on talent level and not on character.
Sure.
And if you look throughout those qualifications in 1 Timothy 3, there's like 11 or so things that he lists, and 10 of those is about character. One of those is about talent.
Yeah, he should have the ability to teach.
It's just this little bitty like phrase in the middle, able to teach.
Yeah.
Surrounded by their character, yes, and what I find a lot of churches do is they lean really heavy into that. Can they teach really well? And they don't give any credence at all to what's their character like. And I think that's where you find churches like those ones that make bad hires on pastors, because the guy might be able to teach well, but is not a great guy.
Yeah,
he's not a great leader.
Yeah.
And so we actually hire everyone on staff except Pastor Lee was members of the church.
That's cool.
Before they came on staff. And I love that because we know their character, and we're able to make sure that their character is in place.
Yeah.
Where whenever you do a couple of interviews,
which ultimately too, like that's equipping the saints for the work of ministry. Like you as an individual, I admire one specific trait that you have. You identify people's giftings and then work to basically work yourself out of a job and give them that job, right? But what that has resulted in is allowing...
Michael's laughing because I did that with Michael.
I know, exactly. You were in mine, Jacob was in mine, Roxanne was in mine. But you're identifying people's giftings and then raising them up and equipping them to do the work of ministry.
So let's actually hop into that one. We'll go out of track here because you probably got some stories to share on this one about me. So we're gonna hop. We're gonna skip the first two and hop to the third one. Third one is pastors and leaders are called to equip the flock, and this is from Ephesians 4, and it says, "And he, Jesus, gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers to do what? To equip the saints for the work of ministry, to build up the body of Christ." So it's not the pastor's job to go do ministry. It's the pastor's job to equip the congregation to do ministry.
So I should say that you've improved on this.
Yeah, exactly.
Over time.
Yes.
I have always wanted to be Chris. I have always wanted to be Chris. Chris was the best guitarist I had ever seen. He was the best drummer I'd ever seen. Chris blindfolded. Chris blindfolded himself and played quads in front of our entire school and killed it. And the school went crazy. And I thought, that's who I want to be in life. But the problem with Chris was significantly better than all of us at everything. And so and the reason that was because he just didn't do things that he was bad at. If he tried something, I remember playing golf with Chris once, and by hole 3 he was done, and he played the rest of the holes with a putter.
Michael's experienced this
because it was hole 9. We get to hole 9, and he goes, "Guys, I gotta go."
Yeah. He doesn't do things that he's not good at. But the problem was he needed a drummer. He couldn't play drums and play guitar and lead worship all at the same time. So he needed a drummer when I was in 9th grade. And so he actually needed a drummer and a bass player. And so he gave me a call and he said, "Hey, I need you to come to church. I just want to see what you can do." And so he said, "Sit down on the drums and play something." And I played like the worst drum beat.
It was
in the
you
world.
and another friend of ours.
James.
We were at the church a few hours before service.
Yeah.
And I was with both of y'all and I said, okay, we need a drummer and a bassist. Which one of y'all want to do?
Yeah.
Which one? And you
Right.
said drums.
Yeah.
So we're like, okay.
Yeah.
Well,
So he taught me how to play drums. But, that was great. He raised me up to play drums. But the problem was when it came to giving away authority, he could not do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so in 2 different worship bands, 2 different ones, we had decided that we were going to record an album to sell at all of our gigs.
2 of them?
You did it twice.
I did?
Yes.
Okay, finish.
The third time.
I'll defend myself afterwards.
The third time you allowed me to do it. But we recorded 3 different albums. In the first one, Chris allowed me to attempt to play. And then he decided that wasn't good enough, so he played all the parts himself. And then our vocalist sang, and Chris didn't like that. So on the second album, Chris didn't even ask anybody. He re-recorded everybody's parts and the vocalist's parts.
Which was awful, by the way.
He's not at the time wasn't a great vocalist. But then on the third album, finally, he allowed me to record my own drums, but even then it was like a ruler with an iron fist who, if I got off beat at all, we scrapped the whole recording and started completely over again.
Yes. Do you have something to add to this, Michael?
I just want to know, is that CD upstairs got Andrew on
That's
it?
the third one, yes.
So he's on it?
I played all the drums on that, baby. Yes, sir.
Right.
Yeah.
If you want a copy, anybody watching this, come find me. I've got it.
We've got a ton of them because no one wanted them.
Yeah, nobody wanted. We played a lot of we were a big D Now circuit band, and that was about it. We opened, well, sort of. We were gonna open for Jars of Clay, and then at the last moment, Jars of Clay backed out, and so we just played a show without. Jars of Clay.
They backed out. It wasn't their fault. They backed out because the guy who organized the event
breached
the contract and didn't pay them.
But my wife was very mad.
She was,
and to this day will not listen to Jars of Clay.
Really? She
Sorry.
was very mad. She kind of went off on the.
Oh yeah, we went full Mama Bear.
Yeah. Okay, to my defense. Okay, there is no defense. Back then, I was what would probably be described as a bad boss, a bad leader, because I was such a micromanager, and I did not have the ability to hand things over to people. I was just such a control freak because in my mind, I knew exactly how I wanted it to look, and I thought in my arrogance, I knew best. So even when other people would play, you probably remember whenever we do our rehearsals, they were awful because I would stop it every 5 seconds.
You quit at one point because you were tired of running rehearsals. You quit playing.
Well, because I did not have that skill set to be able to allow people to do what they thought was best. And so I would stop it every 30 seconds.
To be fair, I never listened to anything. I just showed up and played.
Yeah. And so we would be playing, and then we get into the chorus, and people aren't doing what, in my mind, I think they should be doing. So we would just stop and say, no, you need to do this. So it would take forever to do any of these rehearsals, and then by the end of it, everyone's just mad.
Yeah. And then we've got to go lead worship.
And so it was just one of those things that whenever I got into full-time ministry, that's when I really had to develop that skill set of not micromanaging people, but empowering people to do what they do, and just being a little bit easier going on. If things don't go the way that I think they should, that doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong.
Yeah.
It just it's more of a collective thing. And because I realized that when I started leading the worship here, I'm I can't do this. If I do this every single Sunday, I won't have a team, and I'll just go home just miserable every single day. And so what actually I learned from that is that just because I envision something some way doesn't mean that that's the only way to do it. And what I found is that whenever I did start to release things to other people, that not only did they do it well, but there was times that they actually did better than I could have done it. Yeah. Michael's a great example of that. So Michael, you remember when I was doing the student ministry, and I hated games. I hated making games and stuff. I was that kid when we go youth camps. I would sit to the side during all the rec stuff. So I just wasn't a fan of it. But I felt I had to control everything, and so I was up in the student ministry just grinding my teeth, like making these games. It was just like half done, and I think everyone could tell that this wasn't fun. Michael, though, your house at the time was like Dave and Buster's. You go in, like you would. Do you still have that?
The punch game?
No, it's
It was the
basketball game.
Oh, air
Papa
hockey
Shot?
team.
Yeah, in his house,
That's cool.
in his living room, the basketball game, the air hockey table game.
Cammy is a lot nicer than my wife, I think, would be in that regard.
And so you walk in, and his house is like Dave and Buster's, and so I'm like, why am I doing this? And so I asked you if you were interested in taking over the games. And like instantly, it was much better.
Yeah.
Like Michael was able to do far more than I could ever do in that situation.
Yeah.
And you enjoyed it. Where like for me, it was like begrudgingly doing it. And I remember. So it was shortly after that me and Michael started doing the thing where Michael's mic just. Well, you gotta show them what just happened. Michael's mic just fell on the ground.
Yeah.
So
I'll just hold it this way now.
yeah, there you go. So it was relatively shortly after that we started the transition where Michael started to came on as associate student minister, and I started to work out of that position and him into that position. And I think it was I gave you the tribe games. No, not the tribe games. The initiation night. It was the first initiation, and I think I remember I talked to you the next week and talked about this, and Michael had this super elaborate tribe initiation for all the upcoming sixth graders into the student ministry, and it was just so out there.
Yes,
smoke alarms were potentially about to go off. We won't get into all the details, but man, he just went out of his way to like make this the most fun night and inviting night.
2019.
I think it was 2019.
I stole a lot of what you did for my D Now the next year. Or no, for my summer camp the next year. Because 2020 we didn't do COVID. And so I did a Survivor Games summer camp because of your sixth grade. Yeah, it was Survivor.
And so I remember watching that night unfold because I had nothing to do with this night. I turned it over pretty much completely to Michael. And I remember going home that night thinking, I think Michael's better at this than me.
Okay, so I think that's a big thing though, because I heard a guy say one time as a leadership principle, if somebody can do something 80% as well as you can do it, you need to let them do it.
Yeah.
You want quality, right? If I can do something and it's significantly better than what you can do, okay, probably you need to practice more. But as a leader, if somebody can do something 80% as good as you can, you need to let them do that, because what it does is it raises all ships. And then to me, what that also does is it allows a person to grow in an area of service. Like, I think it takes a certain... You have to be okay with Michael's better at this than me, and I think
there's definitely like a humility check that you have to be okay with in leadership.
Yeah. But I think if you can get over yourself, and as a pastor, if you can equip the saints and be okay with, hey, they're better at this than I am, they're going to get the praise, they're going to get the exaltation or whatever. I think that's when, even like what he says in First Timothy chapter 5, where the honor and the double honor is due, is if I can step back and allow you to flourish, then I'm doing what I'm called to do.
Yeah. And so that's a huge role in a good leader, is not one that does everything. And I think sometimes, like especially smaller churches, that's what they look for in leaders. Can you do everything and can you do it well? And just biblically speaking, that's not what you're looking for. You're not looking for, can someone do everything well?
Yeah.
You're looking for, do they have the ability to identify and train and equip people to
even
go out?
In Exodus 18, so immediately coming out of Egypt, Moses is leading thousands of people, and thousands of people have problems. Like you talked about, the one problem a day would be one day of every one problem a year would be one day every. I can't remember.
Yeah. So if everyone complained about a problem once a year,
right,
on average, we would hear a complaint every single day.
So that was what Moses was dealing with. And in Exodus 18, his father-in-law says, hey, you can't do this. You literally can't. And so what you need to do is raise up 10 people who can raise up 10 people who can raise up 10 people. Yeah. And then they handle issues so that it works itself. And so even in Exodus, the second book of the Bible, God is outlining this. We're working as a team. The church is coordinating as a team with a leader. Yes, there's a leader, and people are submitting to that leader's authority. But there's a quote that says, if you think you're a leader and there's nobody following you, you're just walking. And so even in Exodus 18, that structure existed of you need to hand things off and be able to equip people to do work.
And so, it's not a new concept.
Yeah.
You see it all throughout the Bible, even with Jesus and the disciples. There's a period in the disciples' training that Jesus did everything, and the disciples just watched. But there was a moment, what was it, year 2 or year 3?
Yeah. So there's a book out right now called The 4 Chairs of Discipleship that you should read. But basically, there's 4 phases. Jesus says, come and see. Come and I'll make you fishers of men. What's the third phase? Go. The fourth phase is go and tell. But I can't remember what it is. But basically, over a 3-year period, he shows them for a year. He equips them for a year, and then he sends them for a year.
Yeah. And so even with Jesus, you would think if there's anyone who's equipped to do everything himself, it's Jesus. But even Jesus took the model of, I'm not going to do everything, but I'm going to train up people to go out. Because we're only one person, right? Even Jesus in his humanity.
Well, and even in Matthew 28, Jesus says, all authority has been given to me. I could do it. All authority has been given to me over heaven and earth. All authority. But you go, you make disciples, you teach, you baptize, and I'll be with you.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what Jesus meant when he said, when he's talking to the disciples, and he said, "You'll do greater works than I." Some people shake their head at or scratch their head at that. It's like, it's Jesus. Like you can't do better things than Jesus. But if he's talking about quantity,
sure.
Well, now for sure, because again, he equipped these dozen guys or so. Minus one bad sheep, equip these guys, and then what do we see happen in the book of Acts? They go out, and then they
3,000
go out,
in a day,
and
5,000,
and so now there's this explosive growth that let's say Jesus in his ministry was able to garner a couple hundred people, like close disciples, or not close disciples, but people who are following him. Greater works than that, at least in quantity, you got 3,000, 2,000, and then just spreading out, and all these churches are starting up, and now here we are, 2,000 years later, and it's worldwide. And so very much like all of it's, none of that's to say they did that absent the work of Jesus, because Jesus is the one working through them, that, but just to illustrate, so it's very much, having the mindset of we're all called to do ministry, and it's the pastors and leaders' job to help equip people to do that ministry. And that's a mindset change. Like especially the bigger the church gets, the more people on staff. Me and Michael have talked about this. It's much less us on the ground doing all the work, and more of us developing teams and equipping.
What does it look like for you when you say we're equipping the saints or we're equipping the members for the work of ministry? What is the work of ministry? What are they doing? Is it just how to run a Sunday? Is it just working in student ministry? What does it look like to equip the saints and stuff?
So it's kind of multifaceted. So the most tangible thing of that is like the ministries of the church, like the student ministry. We have our adult leaders that are part of that we're training them. So it's like so the way that ours works is. Michael, how about you explain the structure of how you do student Wednesdays and like with the groups and how that works between like you're leading them versus the adult leaders?
Yeah, so we have it where we've got 14. I always miss someone. 14 to 16 leaders up there. And what we do is we'll do like an intro to the topic, or the way we're doing it now is we have 1 week where I speak to them, and then they have a week where they break in their groups and they dive deeper into that topic. And so that's it. It's the leaders doing it. And so we'll touch base once a week with the leaders and say, here's the curriculum. They look at it, and then you have any questions, and we discuss that. And then we kind of funnel anything like that to the leaders, and then the leaders go and portray that to the students. And I can't imagine keeping up with 70, 80 students and trying to teach and build and connect those relationships. Whereas when you have all the leaders, I know all the students, but I don't have those deep connections. It's the leaders that do that. And so we have the connection with the leaders, and then the leaders take that connection and pass it down to the students, and that's kind of how it works.
And what we realized, or at least what I realized whenever we started doing those groups like that, is when it was just me, I'd be able to touch base with, however many students. But whenever we started really leaning into the adult leaders, taking on more significant responsibilities, there were times that students wouldn't come to me with problems. They would come to their leader with problems. And that's you have to have a heart check there at that point, because it can go one of two ways. You can either be thrilled that for two reasons: one, that you're allowing leaders to take on that role and to do ministry, and two, you're having students who in that moment maybe would have fallen through the cracks, but now they have an opportunity. But if you don't have the right heart, now you see that and you're like, wait, I'm the student minister. Why aren't you coming to me?
Right.
And so it's just always having the heart check of, we're not here for me. We're here to that ministry might be done. So that's one example of how internally our teams are being equipped to do the work of ministry. Externally, it's more of a discipleship training process of how do you live your life, like in your own personal life. One of the things we tell people whenever they join here, they either come to our newcomers class or our members class. One of the things we communicate when we're talking about the Great Commission is we do a lot of missions here, and we do lots of outreach, and we want you to be part of that. But more so than that, we want you to live this out in your own personal life. And that's the mark of really fulfilling, equipping the saints for the work of ministry, is not just do the internal ministries of the church work well, but are they being equipped to then take that out into the world individually?
Right.
That's kind of the full circle of what that would be. You have any other thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I think that if the church forgets to minister outside the walls, the church begins to die. The day that they stop doing evangelism is the day that they start dying. And so you can have the best internal programming and the best ways of reaching your own folks, but if you're not also equipping folks to go out and do missions. And so for even you watching this podcast, you coming to First Azle is great, and you being equipped here. But one of the things you said in your sermon was this is a military base, not a
circus.
A circus, which I've never heard that. I thought it was great.
I stole it from, I think it's Todd Wagner.
Okay. I love it. I love it because what you're doing is you're not coming here to watch. I think a lot of times Americans as consumers have been blessed as consumers. We have the choice. I can go to Panda Express and I've got 30 choices at Panda Express. And I can go to Netflix and I can immediately watch hundreds of thousands of movies. And I can switch over to Netflix and go to Hulu and do the same thing. And on my phone, I've got endless customizable options over and over and over. We're as consumers, as Americans. But if we come to church as a circus to be consumed, as a program to be watched, and we're not coming to be equipped and filled and then sent, then we're the same as any other organization. And I think that's such a huge thing to constantly be reminded that the commission we're called as Christians, not as pastors, as believers, is to go out and make disciples. As we go, we make disciples. If that's at work, make disciples. If that's at school, make disciples. If that's in the nursing home, make disciples. Wherever that is, you're called to constantly be making disciples and pointing people back to Christ.
Yep, the multiplying effect. All right, well, let's keep going just so that way we don't run out of time. Let's mix these two together. Okay. These first two. So that one's called to equip the flock.
Shepherd and protect.
Yeah. Apparently I said protect at some point in the sermon. What's written down is called to watch over. So called to shepherd the flock and to watch over the flock. And I kind of break these down into two. They're kind of two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
Like on the shepherd side, we're under the chief shepherd, trying to figure out, okay, where is God taking the church?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the job of pastors and leaders, is to seek out where is God taking the church and then execute it. On the watch over side, it's more of like the protection side, and there's external threats and even sheep's own mistakes that take them away, as jobs of pastors and leaders to help watch over and sometimes to even correct and to guide back. One of the things that I really leaned into in that both of these roles, there's a heaviness and a weight of responsibility on that.
Yeah.
Now, you being in ministry and seeing your family in ministry, but also seeing your dad in ministry and growing up in ministry, can you speak to that weight?
Yeah. I can remember specific times where, like, there's one memory that was early on in my life. We were still in Melissa, and I remember my dad getting a phone call at like 2 a.m. And I remember it was raining outside, and it was early in the morning. I don't even know why I was aware of this, but he got called out to like a car wreck and had to go minister to a family who, a serious car wreck. I don't know if the person died or what the circumstance was, but he was called out at 2 a.m. I can remember that. And to me, that was the first time I was like, man, that's crazy what his job is called to do. I think a lot of people look for a 9 to 5 where at 5 o'clock you shut it off and you can do whatever you want. And I think that there's some healthiness to that, especially in ministry. There are areas that I try to kind of control the ministry, but you hit it on the head when you said that the church life, your friend life, and your family life are all the same. I think that, like, your work life for a typical, my wife works as a salesperson for a pilot training company, and so her work life, she's got a lot of coworkers that really she only interacts with at work. And then our friends and our church are all united, and so we see our church friends a lot, and that's a big deal for us. Our social life is our church life, but for her, she at least has those two separations. For me, my coworkers are my church friends, are my social life. And so, like, my daughter, it's a blessing to me every time she says it, but we do a Bible study every other Tuesday. And when it's Tuesday, her first question of the morning is today Bible study? And if we say yes, she gets so excited because she's going to go see her friends. And that's a blessing, but it's also, you got to be very cautious of, is there too much? So back to, did I see that in my life? I think my dad did a really good job of shielding us from the burdens of the pastorate. And so I think that there were a lot of times, I still don't really know a lot of the things that my dad faced. I was at a conference that he was at recently, and we sat next to each other, and we were going through this life story things, and there were things in his life story that I had never even heard of, and I lived it, but I had no clue that this happened in his life, or he felt this hardship, or he had this burden, or whatever, because he did a good job of shielding us as a family from that. In the same vein as a pastor, as a student pastor, I don't see it as much. I see the weight of teenagers a lot, anxiety, depression, suicidality. But other than that, there's not a lot of death and dying that I encounter. Whereas our senior pastor, I've wanted him to track how many funerals he's done this year, because I think it's upwards of 50 at this point. I mean, it seems like every week he's got 2 funerals. And so to me, like, the emotional weight of that causes you either to be overwhelmed or jaded. And so you've got to constantly check your own heart to see. Yeah.
And the thing on the funerals, I was reading an article, it was actually bringing up, the weird balance between, a pastor's personal life and the church life. And they tallied up all the funerals that they had to do. And sometimes there's funerals that, the pastors do that they didn't know them. Like, they just got a call, and they're just called to pastor a family through a funeral. Other times it's family, or not family members, but church members. And like, them.
Right.
And so he tallied up all the funerals that they would do of church members. and I can't remember what the number was, but they held up that number and then also pointed out that while a family member or a close friend, when someone dies, they're able to be a partaker of that grieving process and the funeral process, where pastors are leading the process, and so they actually don't get afforded the opportunity to grieve in a traditional way, because they're having to be the one to like actually pastor the family through
I can remember my dad doing weddings and funerals, and his personality, it wouldn't change. Like, he was the same person, but you could tell that he had kind of flipped a switch where if he's doing a funeral, he's in funeral mode. Yeah. He's not in grieving mode. He's not in any sort of like what you would imagine like a human emotional state. He's administrating this funeral. And so I can remember him doing like the funeral of my great grandmother, who like spent a lot of her time raising him. And when it came to the funeral, he was in funeral mode. And then when the funeral was over, he allowed himself that opportunity to grieve. With my grandfather, who died in 2020, same thing. He was in funeral mode. When the funeral was over, he was able to grieve. And it's an interesting thing that I don't think there's a lot of other professions that kind of, at least emotionally, have to deal with that aspect of.
Well, yeah, and going back to the thing of the work life, the church life, and the personal life are all interconnected. In a normal job, if my wife gets a different job, those other two elements of our life are intact.
Yeah,
It's only the work that changes. If our work changes, the entire situation changes.
Yeah.
And not only that, but our entire family's situation changes.
Yeah.
And so there's just, and in leading, so I mentioned not only are all those mixed together, but now you have to be the leader of all of these things. So like in watching over the flock, we've all had to have uncomfortable conversations in that. Yeah. There's times that situations come up and they have to be addressed. And we don't want to address them like no pastor, no leader wants to go into a conversation where you have to admonish someone else. It's not fun. But our role calls us to. Yeah. Like that's, we're called to watch over the flock and to give an account, as Hebrews says. And if we're going to take that seriously, we can't just overlook things. Yeah. And so there's times, again, all these things interconnected, where we have to go and have those uncomfortable conversations with our friends. Yeah. And it makes it that much more messy, and sometimes those conversations go well, and sometimes they don't go well. Yeah. And when they don't go well, now that just throws like a kink into all this, where, okay, because of my work life, I had to address this, but because of that, now it's affecting my social life and my church life with my kids. And there's just, not mean to like complain about that, but it's just the reality of the situation and the heaviness of the situation that I think a lot of people don't fully get. Yeah.
There was a sweet guy in First Bonham. His name was Abel, and every year at midnight on New Year's, he would call my dad. I just wanted to be the first one to wish you, Happy New Year. We're all asleep, Abel, and he would call, wake us up. I just want to be the first one to wish you Merry Christmas. I've got kids waking up in 4 hours, Abel. But sweet guy, but no boundaries, right? Like even as a pastor, and that's not a complaint. It was an anecdote of we're constantly reachable. Yeah. And so being able to set clear boundaries is a very difficult thing to do.
Well, and that's something, I had to deal with in student ministry. Michael's having to deal with it now. You've probably had to deal with it. Is students don't know boundaries, man. They don't get it. And so in their mind, it's like, why can't I call you at 3:00 in the morning? It's like, oh, is there an emergency? No, we're just hanging out.
Yeah. It's a Friday night.
Yeah. And so it's being able to set those boundaries and set that work-life balance of I need to be approachable and reachable because, we're their pastor. Right. But at the same time, I need some kind of balance so that way I can be a leader and a minister to my family too. And that I'm never going to sacrifice my family for the work of ministry, and God doesn't call us to do that. Yeah. And so it's finding that balance.
Well, and even in 1 Timothy 3, we already touched on this, but a characteristic of a qualified elder is someone who manages his household well. Yeah. And if I'm allowing the church ministry to be more of a priority in my life than my family, then I'm already breaking the boundary.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And so, so all that to say is that there's like a weight and a heaviness to it. And I find it interesting in both these passages. So the first one that we looked at was 1 Peter 5 that talked about shepherding, and it says, "Shepherd God's flock among you, not overseeing out of compulsion, but willingly." So in that one, talking to leaders, there's this warning of don't let it drift into compulsion. And then in Hebrews 13, it talks about watching over, obey and submit to your leaders, since they keep watch over your souls as those who will give an account, so that they can do this with joy and not with grief. So in two major passages about leadership in the church, both of them come with these warnings of there's going to be this great temptation to allow it to move into a state of compulsion and grief. Yeah. Do everything you can to not allow it to move into there. Yeah. And so, it's just finding that balance. What I see, not to quote Todd Wagner again, but I heard him talk about leadership in the church, and he said that he told his church that if I'm not allowed to be a Christian, then I don't want to be your pastor. And sometimes people will platform pastors so much that they're not allowing them the ability to be a Christian, and the ability to be a Christian is to have community and to make mistakes and to be able to repent and confess those mistakes. Right. And sometimes churches put too much weight on a pastor and don't allow them to just be a Christian in the midst of that. And so that's where I think a lot of pastors feel lonely and isolated because they haven't been able to find community within their church because they're so busy being the leader of the church. Yeah. That's another good thing about all of us being hired from within is that we all have community here. Where if we're brought in from the outside, not only are you trying to be the leader of this church, but at the same time, you're also trying to find community. And that just gets weird and murky sometimes. Anyways, any other thoughts about that?
No, I think it's good. I think, okay, so how do you support your pastor? Well, you got to pray for his family. Yep. You got to pray that that God will allow him the opportunity to rest. Don't complain. That's a huge deal. And again, I don't think we're seeing that. I think you said the same thing, that y'all aren't seeing that much. We don't see it much at my church. But the more that those complaints pile up, it becomes a personal thing. Is this a personal attack against you in Jefferson? Is this a personal attack against me? Am I
with Delilah? Yeah. I was like, what's Jefferson?
Yeah, at first Jefferson.
Oh, Delilah.
Yeah. And so being able to support your pastor, to encourage him, to pray for him and his family, that's huge. I mean, it's huge help.
Yeah. Got any thoughts, Michael?
No, but I do have one of the guys that goes to the church here. It seems like here lately, anytime that we may be going into anything in the student ministry or in my own personal life, he just comes through with a text. It says, "Man, I'm praying for you. I don't know what your week looks like, but I let you know that I'm praying for you and your family." Dude. And it changes. And like last week, it almost brought me to tears because I'm going, I needed that in that moment.
Dude, I got that same text.
Yeah.
I almost know who you're talking about. That's that text. Sorry, Michelle. That text was the whole reason I did this sermon. So if y'all don't know, my family's just been through a ton of stuff lately with sickness and health, and our 1-year-old has been in a hospital dealing with different surgeries. Everything's fine. Nothing's on fire. But we were dealing with all that. I was just coming off of sickness. My son was just going into sickness. We were tired. I get into my car and start the car and the engine light's on, which we just fixed that car, like paid $1,800 to have that car fixed, and the engine light comes on. And I'm just like, can you just stop? Yeah. Can the world just stop right now? Throwing all this junk at us. And it was like within like 20 minutes of that, I got that text, probably a very similar text. And it was a very similar thing. I was like, normally, when people like, give me, appreciation or whatnot, it is what it is. And I'm not much of a words of affirmation guy. My wife hates it. I'm not much of a words of affirmation guy, so it doesn't usually affect me one way or the other. But I got that text, and I was like, dude, I needed this in this moment. And it actually, I had a whole nother sermon prepared, and scrapped it and kind of just went at this angle, because I'm sure all of us know, working in ministry, that having a congregation that appreciates and supports you is huge versus a congregation that's against you.
Yeah.
It really affects how you do the job. So glad you mentioned that, because I forgot about that.
Yeah, there's that. And then a couple weeks back, me and Cammie were discussing some stuff that happened in student ministry, and we go in to fill in Pastor what's going on. And when we sit down with him, he can see the defeat in my face. And so he just stops and he goes, I want y'all to know what you're doing matters. And when he said that, Cammie left the whole meeting. I go, what'd you think? She goes, Pastor fixed it all. That one statement fixed the way I felt and how I was overwhelmed and all that with it. So not only the congregation, but having a pastor that supports and backs you as well it's huge in the ministry.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. For sure. Yep. Again, our church here is usually pretty good about this. We have been fortunate. I really was. I mentioned when I first came here, being kind of blown away at the lack of like hostility coming from that previous church, that there was so much of it. And so really fortunate. There's issues as with anywhere. But yeah, if any of you out there watching and don't have a whole lot of experience in the ministry, there's a whole lot of back end that you may not realize that goes on. And what any good pastor or leader is looking for is not blind submission, but just partnering together. I'm perfectly happy with anyone questioning anything that I do, as long as it's from a heart of, I want to work at this together. Like I'm not coming against you, but I'm coming to work with you, and I just don't think this is the right way to go. Any thoughts between both of y'all?
No, it's good.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the sermon. The sermon was actually very hard to write. It took me a lot longer to write the sermon than I normally take, because there was just so much that I wanted to communicate, and I had to cut a lot, and it was still long. But yeah, enjoyed it. Yeah. So that's the sermon. What are pastors and leaders called to do in the church? Biblically speaking, they're called to shepherd God's flock, to watch over the flock, and to equip the flock. And how can you partner with them in that? You can do so by praying for them, by trusting them in their leadership and not complaining, and by serving in ministry and allowing them to fulfill that role. All right. Well, that's the end of the sermon. Now we can quickly move into the bad doctrine of the week. And Michael, if you got to head out, I know you had to meet someone. That's okay. But it's time for the bad doctrine of the week. Got 6 minutes? Okay.
Are you going to wrap it up in 6 minutes?
We can aim to do that.
I'm got a timer.
Just shut it down.
Shut it down.
No exit.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Bad doctrine of the week. Let's go.
It's the bad doctrine of the week.
Okay. Bad doctrine of the week. I got this one for y'all. This is another one from my Facebook feed. I was scrolling, and there was this girl that I know that made the comment, made the post, the statement. I've got a husband. We're just not married yet.
Okay.
I've got a husband. We're just not married yet.
Does he know? Because that would be a big deal if she did.
That'd be a good question. So let's unpack, probably reading between the lines what she means by that.
God has ordained some individual?
Sure. Well, no. So she's dating the guy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're dating. I think what she means by that is we're not officially married, but
we're allowed to do whatever. We're going to be married,
but we're married. Yeah, it's like I don't need a paper. I don't need a ceremony. I don't need any leadership oversight over this to tell me that I'm married or not. So I've got a husband. We're just not married yet. Thoughts?
Man, I think that's a problem that a lot of people face, right? Like even the whole, living together, not married versus should we not live together? If I'm engaged, if we're planning on being married, well, it would be cheaper for us if we just live together and blah, blah, blah. What does the Bible say? And honestly, like Genesis is where this is outlined. So in Genesis 1, God creates male and female, and that's very good. He creates them
Don't
male
mean
and
to correct
female.
you, but that's Genesis 2.
You're right, Genesis 1.
Is it 1?
Yeah.
Oh, no, yeah. Oh, yeah, you're right.
How
okay.
dare you?
Yeah, so 1, it gets into it, and then
Yeah,
2, it
I
gets
was
into
going
the
there.
specifics. My
Yeah.
bad.
How dare you?
I should've-
I don't know if you've read your Bible.
I should've.
But in Genesis 1, God creates them male and
Yes.
female. It's very good, and He gives them a purpose. So the purpose is to be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. So their job is to be united together, and to multiply, and then to take the chaos that was the world and subdue it into a better situation, organization. So in chapter 2, which is what you so quickly jumped to,
I assumed. Shouldn't have.
chapter 2 is what Christ references in Matthew something, 19, 18, 20,
17?
somewhere around there, yeah.
18. No.
And in chapter 2, it says, and for this reason, man will he will leave his father and mother, be united with his wife, and the two will become one flesh. And so it's only after leaving mom and dad and being united with your spouse, with one another, the two of you are united together, not with others, not with one another's, which is kind of the polyamory thing that is now kind of starting to rear its head, but to one another, male and female, and then that is what makes them one flesh. So do I have a husband without a ceremony? I don't know.
Well, and to go even more into what Jesus said there, so he quotes that
Right,
verse, and then
right.
he says, what God has brought together.
Yeah, let nobody separate.
Let no one
yeah.
separate, meaning that there is a moment that God brings the two together, and that's the whole point of the ceremony.
Yeah.
Is a pastor meets with them, officiates, and the whole point isn't necessarily to like just jump through like
Right, it's not hoops
logistics.
to get through. Right, this is a uniting.
It's more of like,
yeah.
hey, we're all coming together and seeing God in this moment unite these two
Right,
together.
right,
And so
right.
if you don't have that,
Yeah.
then
Yeah. Which even like 1 Corinthians 7, man, we could drag this on for a while. But 1 Corinthians 7,
you got 4 minutes.
I know,
now.
that's why I'm trying
Yeah.
to whittle it down.
Oh, you got 2 minutes.
1 Corinthians 7, Paul talks about the idea of widows, like young widows being unmarried. And he says, okay, if you want to remain unmarried, that's fine. But if you can't, you need to get married quickly. This isn't something that you drag out. Like, you need to go ahead and get married quickly so that, again, you can be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the command comes from Genesis 1, which is pre-fall, which happens, if you didn't know, in Genesis chapter 3. It seems like Genesis 1 to 3 is a little confusing for you.
I thought that was Revelation.
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah. So,
Yeah, very much. So I remember having this thought when I was in college. It's like you're young, you want to buck the system.
Right, right.
You want to.
I don't need the man to tell me what to do.
Yeah, exactly. Like you start to question all of like the traditional things that are in place, and instead of seeing, okay, like why is this tradition here, you say this tradition is just man-made, it's not important, it's not biblical, we just remove it. So you can just convince yourself that like yeah, we're not married yet, but we're married in God's eyes, right? Or some form of that,
right? Or I'm gonna marry her.
Yeah. And so you just kind of like jump hoops in your head as to why you don't have to go through these quote unquote official channels to do that, not realizing that that's a pretty arrogant, impulsive statement. It's the old, was it Aristotle? I can't remember. It was someone that, that gave the illustration of like two brothers come up and find a fence. Like they just bought property and they find a fence in the middle of the property, and one brother wants to tear the fence down, and the other one is like, no, we should probably figure out why the fence is there before we tear it down. Then we can make a judgment call. And it's kind of like looking in our lives. The Bible says, find the ancient paths and walk down them. And so there's some things in the world, in the church, in our lives that are pointless to be there. They're there because they're there, and people have been doing it. And maybe some of those fences need to be taken down, but some fences are there for a reason. And before you tear the fence down, maybe you should figure out why that fence was even put up.
Yeah.
And so if we're talking about the idea of like marriage and a ceremony and like an official covenant with a pastor coming before them, you could look at that fence in between you and what you want and say, this fence is stupid. It's not there for any reason. Let's take it down. Or you can say, before we tear down this fence, let's figure out why it's there. Is there a biblical reason for this being here? And then once you investigate why the fence is there, you may still come to the conclusion this fence needs to come down, but you may also find, okay, this fence is here for a reason, and we should honor the fence.
Yeah.
I see that with marriage. When I was younger, had a different view. The older I got, the more I was like, these things are here for a reason.
Yeah.
They should be here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sorry you don't have a husband. Whoever wrote this.
Yeah.
If you're not married, if you haven't entered into a covenant union, you have a boyfriend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not to diminish the relationship.
And get married.
Yeah.
Like, it's great.
Get married. Yeah. Yeah. Marriage is great.
But currently you don't have a husband.
Yeah. Yeah. You got anything to add to that, Michael?
No, if I had a penny for every time I heard the student tell me that they're married and they just don't know it yet, or I'm gonna marry her. Oh man, I'd be on the Forbes list. So
they're like, you see that girl? I'm gonna marry her. It's like, she doesn't even know your name, man.
Right. 2 days later, no.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh man, to be young and all the hormones raging and all that stuff. I'm glad that you get to be the forefront on that. Yeah. All right. Fun time. Andrew, thanks for coming down,
Enjoyed it, man.
Andrew
Enjoyed it.
drove. How far
Like
was
an
your
hour
drive?
and a half.
Yeah, Andrew drove an hour and a half to be here. And so let him know that you're thankful that you're here. Appreciate him as a leader in the church and just a guy who drove an hour and a half to be here. Anyways, we're glad that y'all joined us here today. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all those things. If you're still watching, you're one of the few and faithful, and we're glad that y'all joined us. But until next week, we'll see you later.